Hi, I'm Karina Longworth for Netscape.com. 9/11 movies. Whether you think we need them or can't imagine why anybody would even want them, ready or not, here they come. Flight 93, Paul Greengrass's cinema verite telling of the one flight that didn't make its target on that day, opened in May to middling box office but rave reviews. Now, Paramount is releasing World Trade Center, based on the real-life story of two Port Authority cops who were rescued from the rubble of the first tower. The film stars Michael Pena and Nicolas Cage as the cops, and Maggie Gyllenhaal and Maria Bello as their wives. And it was directed by, of all people, Oliver Stone. The rumor early on was that Stone, who's probably best known for the flashy shock tactics of natural-born killers, was up to his own tricks, staging graphic recreations of office workers jumping to their fiery deaths. But then Paramount started showing the thing, and the buzz changed. Critics were overwhelmed by how tasteful and sincere a film Stone had actually managed to make. The finished cut has small doses of gore, but it's realistic. The characters take it in and are visibly affected by it. It's part of the narrative and not just done for shock value. And though Stone digitally recreated the towers and physically recreated their rubble on a soundstage in Los Angeles, he doesn't go as far as to have us relive the more sensational moments of that day. Most of the action of this film takes place in the dark, with Cage and Pena's characters convinced that if they fall asleep they'll die, actually talking each other awake for a good portion of the film. Stone does an effective job of showing their physical agony, and in brilliantly edited parallel sequences, Bello and Gyllenhaal wait for word on their husbands. It's the women who carry the emotional weight of the film. The script is full of tear cues, but the actresses, each playing somewhat against type, manage to make even the most contrived bits of dialogue sound genuine. The supporting cast is full of stock roles, the kind that would have been played by beloved former stars if this were the 50s. Instead, we get characters that can be summed up by shockingly contrived one-line summaries, kind of as though this were the 50s. In fact, the most interesting thing about World Trade Center is how dated it feels. With the exception of a brief, unnecessary epilogue, it takes place entirely on September 11th, and the whole thing exudes the tone of that day. Characters never ask who did this or why. Though the film is clogged with actual television footage from September 11th, bin Laden is never mentioned by name, nor are terrorists in general actually blamed. Any concept of politics in the film stems from personal shock, anguish, and physical feelings of loss and pain. That's not to discount the integrity of those feelings, but this is a film in which a Marine in full uniform stands proudly on a pile of rubble and declares that someone is going to have to avenge the evil that brought those towers down. After 3 years in Iraq and mounting debate over the way our government has handled both the 9/11 investigation and retaliation, World Trade Center's reliance on good versus evil metaphors and uncritical spouting of Bush-like rhetoric feels at best incongruous with the current zeitgeist, and at worst, like something out of a 1930s melodrama, a Capra-esque reduction of real-life tragedy to fit into a pat Hollywood framework. Basically, if you're one of many who fear that what happened on September 11th, 2001 is far too thorny and complex to be done justice by a commercial fiction film, and that any attempt to do so, no matter how well-intentioned, would somehow miss the point, I think Oliver Stone might have just confirmed your worst fears. Stone is a filmmaker who's made a career out of questioning the narrative that the mainstream media has to tell about his subjects, and he's famously made controversial statements about 9/11 in the past. Maybe it's natural to wonder why Stone was drawn to this particular aspect of the 9/11 story, and why he chose to tell it in this way. But given his almost insurmountable bad reputation as a crackpot liberal, and the spectacular failure of his last film, Alexander, if he wanted to work in Hollywood again, I can't imagine he was given much of a choice. You can decide for yourself whether or not you're personally ready for 9/11 movies. I imagine most Americans could handle World Trade Center with its technically accomplished, emotionally strident retelling of the same version of the story you've undoubtedly watched for yourself on TV. But interestingly, it's only in an ill-conceived set of hallucinations, where Pena's character envisions a psychedelic Jesus bearing bottled water, that Stone invites us to ponder what this story might have looked like had he been brave enough to inject his trademark visual style and patented paranoia into the proceedings. I don't know if the average American will ever be ready for that version of the story, but Even if it's just in the name of having something new on the table, I would have liked to have seen it. I'm Karina Longworth for Netscape.com.